Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. Just a couple of minutes for people to settle down. Thanks for started. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Take your seats, please. We don't normally have this kind of stirring music in the Library of Mistakes, but we've got a very special star-studded night tonight. It is the Oscars of the financial mistake world, the so-called Russells, I think they're going to be called from now on. And we're delighted to have you all here. And can I ask you to give a big round of applause to your host tonight, Professor Russell Napier.
Thank you, David, and thank you all for coming, my fellow errorists, here tonight to celebrate the world of mistakes. We're here to celebrate the right kind of wrong. You may recognize that. It's the name of a recent book by Amy Edmondson. It's Book of the Year by the Financial Times, because there may be a wrong type of wrong in terms of investigating and learning from. The right type of wrong, well, we live in a world that seems to celebrate the mistake. There's a failure industry out there, and you may have failure fatigue. The failure industry seems to consist of people who have failed once, telling you how they failed once, mainly because they're now very successful. And that's not the sort of failure we're here to celebrate, because we're not yet celebrating my failures. That might be next year. This year, we are celebrating the failures of others, but they're selected as the failures that we might all learn from. Now, this library is not about mistakes. It is about mistakes, but it's about a broader scope. It's a business and financial history library, because if we called it the Edinburgh Business and Financial History Library, nobody would turn up. But it is called the Library of Mistakes, which is a subset of business and financial history. The reason we're here is because of a quote from a man called James Grant, who some of you may know from Grant's Interest Rate Observer. And many years ago, he wrote the following: "Progress is cumulative in science and engineering, but cyclical in finance." So if we are to transcend the cyclical, we are going to have to learn from the past, and we are going to have to learn from mistakes. So you are now in a library, but I like to sometimes call it the black box. The black box, which you're all familiar with in the world of aviation, was invented in 1953. And it records what goes on in the cockpit so that other pilots, sadly it usually is other pilots, can learn from the mistakes that happened in the cockpit. And this is the black box of business and financial history. Success, but also failure. So as many of you are business professionals, as others are investing their own money, you're here tonight to learn from this black box, and particularly the black box of 2023. There are many, many quotes about mistakes. You'll probably realize that I get sent them all the time. We have one up here: "Mistakes are the portals of discovery." This is how we justify it, from James Joyce. But I do particularly like Thomas Edison. "I've not failed. I've just tried 10,000 ways that did not work." That was a good thing for Edison in the world of the physical sciences, but in the world of investment, we're using other people's money. And believe me, finding 10,000 ways that don't work is not really appropriate. when you're using other people's money. So we're here to try and learn from other people's mistakes to reduce those. Wouldn't it be wonderful if one year we had to cancel this event because there'd been no mistakes? At that stage, presumably I would have to get up at the beginning and go, mission accomplished, and sit down. But I feel certain that that probably isn't going to happen. This is also where we discover the events, dear boy. You remember Harold Macmillan, I think, speaking in 1957, was asked what was the problem with politics, to which he replied, events. And all of us have a plan. All of us make a plan for the future. Von Moltke, the famous German military theorist, said that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Put more pithily, Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. Well, we're here to talk about the punches in the mouth, and we're here to learn from them. So we're not here to in any way celebrate those who make mistakes, but to learn from the mistakes they've made. To err is human and to forgive divine, according to Alexander Pope. Well, we can't forgive, but we can do the next best thing, and we can learn. Now, we live in a world of much greater complexity, much greater interconnectivity, and the ability to spot mistakes is becoming actually more important because of the consequences of a small mistake can be absolutely huge. There is a proverb made famous by Benjamin Franklin, but probably dating from the 14th century, which you may have heard, but I'll read it out again. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. So we're trying to find that horseshoe nail in time. And that may not be a task for the specialist. It may be a task for the generalist. So we are here to learn from financial history, which is a generalist subject. That's what history is. And hopefully at some time you're in a room somewhere where decisions are being made by specialists, but there's one person with a little bit of knowledge of history who can spot potentially that one horseshoe nail, which in the modern world can have huge consequences. So we're here to learn from other people's mistakes because it's very difficult to learn from your own. I'm not Scottish, as you can tell from my accent, but one of the first sayings I came across when I moved to Scotland was, a big boy did it and ran away, which seems to permeate business and politics, I should say, as well. So it's very easy to not take responsibility, but so much easier to look at everybody else's. Now, I will now read the nominations from Mistake of the Year, and thank you all for your nominations. And then I'll talk about a few of them before we get on to the winners. So they are, in no particular order, Ben Bernanke. Now, Ben Bernanke always comes up in mistakes. He's a perennial favourite, but he's also a financial historian, so he'll not be going in the top three. So we'll just mention that straight away. Home REIT, a property company which invests in the provision of sheltered housing for homeless people throughout the United Kingdom. What could be wrong with that? We'll come back to that. Wealth managers who kept their clients invested in the bond market as yields reached a 5,000-year low on the basis that an allocation to bonds would be low risk. FTX, where to begin with FTX? Run by a Wunderkid, who is now criminally convicted, who would play video games while trying to raise money from venture capitalists, and succeeded. Well, he certainly succeeded with venture capitalists. Whether he won the game or not, history does not record. We also have nominated a series of governments in this country who continue to guarantee public sector pensions, inflation-linked to 5 million people, which I think we all know is not possible in the long run, but no government will get up and say that. Tingo Group, which is a Nigerian mobile company. You will make your hair curl if you still have hair when we get to talk about that. Silicon Valley Bank, which I think is relatively well known, which collapsed spectacularly in March. Siemens Energy, which bought out its strategic partner in something called GameStop, a company you would think it knew a lot about, given that it was a large minority shareholder, but it turned out that it didn't really know very much at all. Credit Suisse, one of the greatest names in financial history, founded 1856, dead 2023. That one was a long time in coming. Farfetch, which is a e-commerce company, which also disappeared last year. Elon Musk for his purchase of X/Twitter is another nomination, and it may just be too early to tell whether that is as bad as it looks. And there were numerous nominations for the Scottish Government. Now, all I'm going to say about that is that there is another jury for the Scottish Government. It's not the jury at the Library of Mistakes, it's the people of Scotland, and the people of Scotland will have their say, but for those of you who have nominated the Scottish Government, you also get to vote. Let's just talk about a few of these and some of the lessons we can learn from them. Home REIT. Now, Home REIT was an IPO in October 2020, so this is all quite recent. This money was raised quite recently from investors. It is raised on that IPO £240 million. And to describe it, it's an investment trust seeking to fund the acquisition and creation of accommodation for homeless people, tick. Also targeting inflation-protected income, tick, and capital return. So those are the three things it promised to do simultaneously. So that was £240 million. In September 2021, it raised another £370 million. In May 2022, it raised another £150 million. That's a total of £760 million. And by the second half of 2023, it was effectively, or by January 2023, it was suspended from the stock market. Incredibly quick in just a short period of time. Now, there's lots of litigation in all of these that I'm going to talk about tonight, so it's probably easier if I just quote from some of the litigants. But this is what the lawyers, the shareholders, have to say on the mistakes that were made at Home REIT. The lawyer's statement is as follows. Over the last year, Home REIT, which had previously positioned itself as a vehicle to tackle homelessness, has continued to sell off its properties at sizable discounts to their purchase price. The company has repeatedly admitted that the board had little knowledge of the company's property portfolio, their condition, underlying occupancy, the tenants' liabilities to meet rental payments, the standards of quality, safety and compliance. Well, if the lawyers are right, that's a mistake, and time will tell in a court of law whether they are or not. The diminution in the value of the property to date, remember the first pot of capital raised late in 2020, well, the property portfolio was written down by 58%. And the news within the last 2 days is there's a criminal investigation underway in Liverpool that some of the charities involved in Liverpool may have got. I think the phrase is undue benefits to some of the trustees of the charities. So time will tell where that one goes to. The shareholders of Home REIT, M&G, BlackRock, Vanguard, Saracen, Legal & General, and Alliance Trust. So this was a professional body of shareholders. And the auditor was BDO. That's Home REIT, nominated this year for Mistake of the Year, but as I've just read it out, not the winner, because there are others that surpass Home REIT. Farfetch. Is there anybody here who knows who Farfetch are? I didn't think so, because they're a purveyor of luxury branded goods, so that would explain... that probably explains the lack of information. And of course, I also hadn't the faintest idea who Farfetch were, but they were set up in 2007 as an e-commerce business to get luxury branded products and sell them through their website, help them facilitate their sales through the internet rather than through bricks and mortar. It did that, it got quite a few clients, but it wasn't really making very much money because most of the really good luxury branded guys didn't want to sell through a website. They wanted to have their own website or they wanted to sell bricks and mortar. So it decided to change strategy and buy luxury branded goods. So it had a kind of supermarket with not enough to sell, so it decided to buy one of the manufacturers, and then two, and then three. So it got into really an entirely different business. To get into this business in 2018, it raised $805 million US dollars. In 2021, it had peak revenues of $2.3 billion. And 3.7 million customers. That was also the first year it generated a profit, opening in 2007. So things are looking good for the company. It's generated a profit in 2021. Its IPO opened at $28, was up 42% on the first day. It rapidly rose to $73 per share, giving this company a market capitalization of $24 billion. 24 billion US dollars. It is now suspended at 2 cents, with a market capitalization, assuming the 2 cents is right, of 8.7 million, all within the space of just a couple of years. The mistake, well, once again, litigation will out on this. The creditors are suing. They're owned, I think, 1.7 billion US by this company. And there's a great dispute over the ownership of what's left of the company as well. But when one business didn't succeed would be a better phrase for that. They got into a different business and raised capital to get into a different business, which was bankrolled by the shareholders. So diversification. Tingo Group. Now, I have to admit I'd never heard of Tingo Group before either, but it's listed on the NASDAQ. At one stage, it had a market capitalization of $1 billion US dollars. I keep saying 1 billion as if it's a lot of money. Well, it is to me. Obviously, to many people, 1 billion is not a lot of money anymore. Now, as this is also subject to litigation and the CEO is still missing under criminal charge, we'll just read two conflicting announcements, one from the company and one from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which gives you some idea of what was going on at Tingo Group. So it's basically owns Nigerian assets. It's run by a man who's got a full name, but his nickname is Dozie. He's Dozie Mombusi. That's the name, his own name. This is not a name that's been attributed to him. Trading halted on the 23rd of November at 69 cents, once traded at $12. This is what the company said excitedly in May 2022, so not that long ago. This is their press announcement. Tingo Inc. and MICT announced that they have executed a definitive agreement to merge and consolidate their operations to create an over $900 million annual revenue and highly profitable NASDAQ-listed fintech and agri-fintech company serving the African and Asian markets with a global expansion strategy. Based on recent SEC filings, the combined cash balances of Tingo and MICT are expected to total more than merge group with well positioned to take advantage of further growth opportunities. So that was May 2022. This is just over a year and a half later, in December 2023, from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Remember, this was listed on NASDAQ in the United States. The Securities and Exchange Commission today announced that it obtained a temporary asset freeze, restraining order, and other emergency relief against Dozie Mombusi and 3 affiliated US-based entities, of which he is the CEO, in connection with an alleged multi-year scheme to inflate the financial performance metrics of his companies. As alleged, Mombusi spearheaded a brazen scheme using phony records and fictitious entities to make the Tingo companies he controlled appear highly profitable so that he could hoodwink investors and reap massive benefits at their expense, said the FEC. This was brought to light by a short seller. Short sellers get a lot of bad press, but they do occasionally deserve some good press for highlighting some of these problems. And this was from Hindenburg, a man called Nate Anderson. And this man does this for a living. He said, "I've never seen anything like this. For a decent fraud case, there might be a couple of material representations where management will try to lie about a big thing or two. Here, he said, what was faked? They faked an entire conglomerate. That one was listed in the stock market." A little side quote from the Financial Times of another little British angle to this particular failure, this particular mistake. And I read now in quotes from the Financial Times. Tingo's founder also enlisted the services of Chris Cleverly, a barrister in the United Kingdom with experience working on white-collar fraud and organised transnational crime issues. According to his chambers, he is the cousin of the UK Home Secretary James Cleverly, and he became Tingo's president and board member. He is still at the chambers if you want to hire him for any white-collar fraud and organised transnational crimes cases. And that's all according to the Financial Times. So we're going to go on now, having just been through a few of the nominations, and I picked out obviously a few of the more lurid examples of how things can go wrong. But I think in this day and age, how they can go wrong so quickly, from raising the capital or doing the transaction to the downside. So now we are going to announce the winner of the third position.
John Miller kindly volunteered to come up.
John?
Open the envelope.
Third place, Credit Suisse.
So Credit Suisse was one of the biggest, most important and famous names in banking, and it disappeared last year. You may not even have noticed because there was so much going on last year in terms of failure. When I say disappeared, it was taken over, merged with the assistance of the Swiss government into UBS. This bank was founded in 1856 and can survive just about anything apart from an entrepreneur. The share price peak was 82 Swiss francs. And it was suspended at 85 centimes. In 1990, which is quite a long time ago, it was trading at 20 Swiss francs, now 85 centimes. We had here, not long ago actually, Sir Philip Auger talking about Barclays Bank, and the subtitle for his history of Barclays is The Bank That Lived a Little. Well, this is the bank that lived a lot, because it decided really back in the 1980s that it wanted to be an international bank, not a Swiss bank. Many people will remember it bought a famous broker, American broker called First Boston. So we had CSFB, Credit Suisse First Boston. It acquired Bank Leu, known as Switzerland's oldest bank, in 1990. In 1993, it outbid UBS for a controlling stake in Switzerland's fifth largest bank, Swiss Volksbank, for 1.1 billion. It also did with Winterthur Group in 1997 for 9 billion and acquired the asset management division of Warburg Pincus in 1999 for 650 million. Donaldson, Lufkin and Jeanette was purchased for 11.5 billion in 2000. Acquisition growth in the services industry at high prices where the assets go up and down in the lift. I've been an investment banker or a stockbroker. Fortunately, I was not involved in any of those particular transactions. But I have been a broker, so I know how the assets go up and down the lift and out the door. On February the 9th, 2023, the bank reported an annual loss of 7.3 billion. That's the biggest loss by a bank since the Great Financial Crisis. On the 14th of March, it published its annual report saying it had identified material weaknesses. Its major shareholder said that it would not be able to provide it with any further capital. There were runs on the bank, both in both divisions, in its deposits, but also on its asset management products, and the government stepped in. The total support package, and this is what was promised as opposed to what was utilised, but ultimately the government of Switzerland and the central bank combined had to post or say they would put up 289 billion US dollars to save this institution or facilitate its removal and movement into UBS. I don't think much of that will actually be called upon. That would be a third of the GDP of Switzerland. And yet, in the scheme of things, it barely registered last year and came in number 3 in our list of mistakes. And it's a good example of, although the failure of, or the buyout of Credit Suisse happened in 2023, if I could show you the share price, this is something people have been talking about for at least a decade, if not longer. This was a bank that seemed to weather the Great Financial Crisis relatively well. So the seeds of mistake can be sown a long time before the year in which they come home to roost. That is number 3. So what could possibly be bigger than the disappearance of one of the world's biggest banks? We're about to find out.
Charles Keenan. It's going to be like... Charles kindly supplies the drinks, may I point out, so it's very important. The drum roll should be coming, yes.
In second place, I'd like to announce FTX.
So, Charles, thank you very much. It should be a standing ovation for the man who buys the drinks, I think. But, for those of you who don't know what FTX was, we use past tense. It was a crypto firm, a crypto trading firm over here. But actually over here there was another business, which was let's call it a private equity business. A business that invested money in startups, in new businesses in tech. The problem was, and this is relayed in the court case in which the CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, was convicted, is that the money put into the bit over here, which had some of the characteristics of deposits, was used to fund the investments over here, the beneficiary of whom was probably mainly Mr. Bankman-Fried. So that was the basis of the court case, but it's not probably the basis of the mistake. Actually, misuse of funds for this sort of things is relatively common. I think probably every year we have solicitors who put their money into the client account. It's the same sort of thing. There are a few other things, and two I'd like to highlight, though there are many, many in the FTX case. The first one, maybe I should mention in terms of library mistakes, we used to have a lovely tin of beer here that was brewed for FTX. They were based in the Bahamas, and a friend of mine owns a brewery in the Bahamas, and he made a lovely beer for them, and they insisted that it was called Disruptor IPA. So there's a certain amount of arrogance associated with that alone, which may make you slightly concerned about the corporation. But Stephen's brewery is called the Pirate Republic, and the motto for the Pirate Republic is brewed by pirates for pirates. And sadly, that beer was not called in evidence in the case, though I did suspect that it could be called in evidence. Anyway, just to prove the point, someone's now stolen our FTX tin. And it was empty because traveling hand luggage, the only way I could get onto the airplane was to drink it. So, but anyway, we're not sure whether it was stolen or the cleaner threw it out, thinking it was just an empty tin of beer. So FTX, that's the essential business. When we look at the mistake, I think we have to begin with the investors and the people who bankrolled the company. These are the smartest guys in the room. There's a book in here called The Smartest Guys in the Room. It's about long-term capital management, a hedge fund that failed in 1998. But the smartest guys in the room were all investors in this company, and I will read them out. At least some of them anyway. IVP, Iconic Capital, Third Point Ventures, Tiger Global, Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, Lightspeed Venture Partners, Ribbit Capital, Temasek Holdings, BlackRock, Ontario Teachers Pension. Well, okay, so we all make mistakes, and it's not the first time venture capital has come a cropper, maybe by taking risks, getting some of them right and some of them wrong. But I wanted to read this quote from the New York Times of November 2022 to explain the relationship between these investors and the CEO. And this is what the New York Times wrote in November 2022, just as the thing was about to close down. But even by 2021's frothy standards, Mr. Bankman-Fried's latitude from investors was extreme. Despite raising $2 billion, he remained the majority owner of the company. No investors joined FTX's board of directors, which is made up of Mr. Bankman-Fried and an FTX employee and a lawyer. An advisory board of investors had no functional control over the company. The company did not tell investors the nature of its business with Alameda Research, which is that second business I mentioned, Mr. Bankman-Fried's separate crypto trading operation. Mr. Bankman-Fried was so averse to outside input that investors who dared suggest that a more experienced executive run the company were likely to be shut out of future rounds of funding, one investor said. So it was $2 billion with effectively no oversight, no control over a very young CEO. I nominate that for a mistake, but I think there is, or that has won as an award. Well, I think there's a bigger issue here. Now, I'm sure many of you know that Michael Lewis has written a book on FTX, and I think it's a very good book. Not everybody thinks it's a very good book. But it focuses on one strand of the FTX problem, which is utilitarianism. John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham's body, you probably know, sits upright in a chair. So I think at University College London, he gets wheeled out for dinner once a year. This is what Caroline Ellison, his colleague and girlfriend, said in a court of law about his way of thinking about the world and how the world works. And she said the following under oath. He said that he was utilitarian, and he believed that the ways that people tried to justify rules like don't lie, don't steal within utilitarianism didn't work. And he thought that the only moral rule that mattered was doing whatever would maximize utility. So essentially trying to create the greatest good for the greatest number of people or beings. He also talked about this in the context of thinking about what was good for the world, saying that he would be happy to flip a coin If it came up tails and the world was destroyed, as long as it came up heads, the world would be more like twice as good. So this gentleman was running a very large corporation. It was a large corporation by the time it folded. It ties into a book that we also have in here by John Ronson, The Psychopath Test, in which Ronson sent a test so you can test yourself to see if you're a psychopath, by the way. Whether you would notice the answer or pay any attention to it's a different thing. But he sent this psychopath test to leading CEOs of American corporations to discover that the likelihood of a CEO being a psychopath was 4 times higher than the population in general. So there is something going on in a world where people with that way of thinking, that utilitarian way of thinking, a world where lying is okay, a world where it doesn't really matter as long as you get results, has come to the fore. And I think the case of Theranos is another good example of where we've allowed that to happen, because we have allowed it to happen. So that's number 2. I think there are 2 mistakes. Well, there's a lot more than 2 mistakes, but those are the 2 I'd like to highlight. And now we come to the highlight of the minute. Well, the highlight of the minute is when I get a drink. But anyway, before that, the winner of this year's Library of Mistakes, Mistake of the Year, because Lauren does all the work right here, in case you haven't noticed. Lauren will open the envelope to declare
Lauren, there you go.
who the winner is of this year's award.
We should have a drum roll ready, but... Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Silicon Valley Bank.
Silicon Valley Bank. Now, I suspect that as the years go on and we do have more of these, the winner was always going to be a bank. Now, there's a good reason for that, and that is because banks are heavily geared institutions, and that's the nature of what a bank is. So we laugh at bankers, we pillory them, but they're running very geared balance sheets, and that's what they're supposed to do. And that's what society needs them to do. So they are naturally more at risk than most people. The rest of us really have a choice as to whether we want to use gearing and whether we want to use debt. But they don't have a choice. Now, there are limits to that. You can have different limits in gearing, but they're always at higher risk. Now, I think that Silicon Valley Bank is the winner because it's pioneered a new way to bankrupt a bank. We've been in the banking business, well, in this country, we've been in the banking business since 1695, and this country being Scotland, 1694 in England. And over those many years, people have found manifest numerous ways to bankrupt banks. But they seem to have found a new one, and quite a spectacular one. This is not a small bank. I know most of us hadn't probably heard of it before the events of March last year, but this was the 16th largest bank in the United States. It sits today as the 2nd biggest bank failure in US history, only surpassed by Washington Mutual in the great financial crisis. It grew exceedingly quickly. In 2017, its assets were $51 billion. By 2021, 4 years later, they were $211 billion. Now, when I started and came to Edinburgh knowing absolutely nothing about finance and not much has changed, I worked for Baillie Gifford and I went to see an American banker. And he was from the Midwest. This was 1990. The Midwest was having a tough time and his bank was kind of succeeding. It was surviving in this really tough marketplace. And he realized after that meeting that I really didn't know anything about banks. And he said that to me. He said, you don't really know anything about banks. And I was very happy to admit at the age of 25 that I didn't know anything about banks. He said, look, here's one thing you've got to remember. If it grows like a weed, it is a weed. And I've been using that relatively successfully ever since. Now, there may be a few exceptions to that, but on the whole, if you're going to grow that quickly, imagine that you're trying to grow your bank that quickly. Every year you have to go out and find good credits that are, you say you've got 100 credits one year, you're running to 100 people, you've got to go out and find 200 next year, then it's 400 the year after. So there's a natural problem with growing a bank quickly, which it becomes more difficult to find good credits. But that's not what SVB did, because they took the best credit in the world. They managed to go under by lending to the best credit in the world, and the best credit in the world, or one of them, is the United States government. And that's where they lost money, by lending to the United States government. Now, bankers are in the business of borrowing short and lending long. They take your deposits at a derisory rate, and they lend and you can pull your money out overnight, and they lend it for many years in advance to others, and in that spread is where they make their profit. And when interest rates begin to go up, it's not immediately obvious that these people aren't going to pay back their money. So the value of the assets doesn't really go down. It can take really quite some time before we say these loans are maybe not so good. But when you lend money to the United States government in its bond market, these things are priced basically 24 hours a day across the planet. And as interest rates go up, the price adjusts really quite quickly. They managed to have this position where they'd taken all these deposits and lent it or bought this asset class, which was falling very quickly. Let me give you an example. I mentioned at the beginning that one of our nominations was for wealth managers who had held bonds, government bonds, in 2000. It just so happens that the United States of America issued a 30-year bond in the summer of 2020. You've now lost 50% of your money owning the 30-year bond. I think it's 46%. The capital, you've lost 46% of your money. This is what banking regulators call the risk-free asset. So you've lost 46% of your money. So they managed to overload on that particular asset class. There were lots of ways to hedge it. They decided not to hedge it. They could easily have put money into short-term US government paper with low credit risk and not taking the interest risk. But they decided to go for the long end or further out. And I'm sure they weren't in the 30-year, but they were further out the curve. So by December 2022, this bank had on its lending primarily to the US government losses of $15 billion US dollars. It was a bank that understood that bonds had yields but not prices. And that is when word began to get out. And then we have the second mistake. We all know, or most people here have lived through the great financial crisis, and we watched before that, actually a year before that, the run on Northern Bank, not Northern Bank, Northern Rock, and the great queues that formed outside Northern Rock. Now, the problem for Silicon Valley Bank is that most of its depositors were not members of the public. They were members of an elite group called private equity investors who held huge sums of cash. 85% of all of the deposits of this bank were not guaranteed by the government or the FDIC. There was no deposit guarantee because they were so huge. So 85% of the depositors of the bank knew they could lose everything if the bank got into trouble. Well, that's not the case with RBS or other banks where most of the depositors are well within the FDIC limit. The problem with all of these guys is they all knew each other as well, or virtually knew each other. They're all living pretty close together in Silicon Valley, or if not actually. Pointing out, as one of the nominees did, that the whole point of these deposits held by private equity was to invest them anyway. So there was a natural proclivity for the deposits to potentially shrink as they were invested in the investments which their clients had paid them to invest in. So yes, a real problem in owning that so-called risk-free asset at a time of 5,000-year low rates, but also relying on a particular flighty form of funding. So bonds have prices as well as yields. Who knew? Prices go up and down. These are the two lessons for everybody involved in Silicon Valley Bank. But of course, the most important one for Silicon Valley Bank and for all of our nominees tonight and all of our winners tonight is read more financial history. So I would like to say that 2023 was a bumper year for mistakes, but I suspect I'll be back next year saying 2024 was a bumper year for mistakes. Every year, I suspect, is going to be a good year for the Mistake of the Year award. So I'd like you now to join us for a drink to celebrate. Well, celebrate not the mistakes, but to celebrate the learning. And I forgot, there is an award. So could a representative of Silicon Valley Bank please come up to the front? Well, in the absence, and I think there is an absence, we will leave it here in the Library of Mistakes. And for those of you watching globally, it's here. Should you wish to come and pick it up, just let us know, and we'll give it to you. Mistake of the Year 2023, Silicon Valley Bank.
Well done.
Sorry, just 1 minute. So actually, there's a few announcements I wanted to make, which I should have said at the beginning. So if this has whetted your appetite for mistakes, there is a festival of mistakes going on in Wales. We're in conjunction with the trustees of Hay Castle. We are running a festival of mistakes. There will be an event on the Friday the 1st, the evening of Friday the 1st. It's all day, a full day of mistakes on the 2nd. And there's a morning on Sunday, the 3rd. There's a morning at Hay on Wye. This is only the second festival of mistakes in the world, the first one having been run by us at the Bank of England last year. So there's that. The new podcast is out. It's an interview with John Turner and Will Quinn on their book Boom and Bust. I've just listened to it. I think it's very good and quite entertaining and worth a listen. And some of you will know that we are, the charity that runs this is funding and partially funding a move by the Market Mind Hypothesis into the Edinburgh Futures Institute. And we are looking to fund that. Funding is progressing, but if you'd like to get involved in that, please let me know. And what I was about to say was that that's it. That's the end of our celebration of mistakes. And my toast would be, when we get a drink in our hands, to mistakes, and may there be fewer of them. Thank you.
I just want to say something very quickly, okay? They say that one of the secrets of a happy life is to count your blessings. Do we all realise how lucky we are to have Russell and the Library of Mistakes here? And I want to thank him very much, because I made him do this speech on holiday. So please, again, can you just give a huge round of applause to Russell for doing this? Thank you very much.
Drinks available at the back.
There you go.